Hey guys, this video is going to encompass your 3A, 3B Early River Valley Civilizations notes. So here we go. Obviously the civilizations that we are going to be focusing most of our time on here will be in these areas: the Aegean Sea, the Nile River Valley, the Tigris and Euphrates River Valleys, the Indus River Valley, and the Yellow River Valley. Big question, guys. What is a civilization? What makes civilization different from not civilization? Well, a really stuffy, long definition would be civilization is an advanced state of intellectual, cultural, and material development in human society, marked by progress in the arts and sciences, the extensive use of record keeping, including writing, and the appearance of complex political and social institutions. Now, before you go writing all of that down, let's boil this down to important parts. So I would say it's an advanced society. We don't need to mention some of those other stuff. Obviously, we're humans. We've got progress in the arts and sciences, record keeping, including writing, and the appearance of complex political and social institutions. Guys, we do need to work on paraphrasing so that we become better note takers as we go forward here. So let's make sure we do that and not write everything down word for word. If you insist on writing everything down word for word at this point in time, go ahead and pause to do this, though. Alright, river valleys. Now, during the New Stone Age, the Neolithic times, permanent settlements appeared in river valleys around the Fertile Crescent. Why? Well, before we get into the why, what time frame are we talking about here when it comes to New Stone Age? Let's just quickly review. We are talking about 8,000 BCE to 3,000 BCE. Remember now, in Neolithic times we had talked about learning how to farm, our first early settlements, first signs of architecture, all of the above. Well, remember we said farm. Our first civilizations are going to start to crop up in river valleys, specifically around the Fertile Crescent, and the reasons are access to water. We said farming. We have to have water to farm to grow crops. Alright, also we've got rich soil. These rivers would flood every year, and when they flood, they would leave behind their silt from the bottom of the rivers within which you could use to make very fertile soil. And then also, guys, protection from invasion. I would like to point out that in the year 3000 BCE, we couldn't just hop in a boat and motor across the river to go invade somebody. Rivers had this tendency to limit armies' abilities to attack. The other thing that rivers tended to do is they were river valleys. Valleys imply that they're at the bottom of mountains on each side, so mountains would provide protection. And in the case of the Fertile Crescent here, guys, all of this area that's not green is essentially desert. So you've got desert, you've got a lot of protection. So these river valleys are very safe from invasion for the most part. They have access to water and rich soil, which help promote farming. The big ones you need to know start really taking shape around 3500 BCE. Sorry, had to do that. Just real quick where they are, we'll go into more detail the next couple of classes and in the next couple presentations. Mesopotamian civilization is on the Tigris and Euphrates River valleys in southwest Asia, what is today known as the Middle East and Iraq. The city of Baghdad is actually between the two rivers. Egyptian civilization is right where it's always been, the Nile River Valley and the Nile River Delta in Africa. Remember, there's a delta at the top of the Nile River, and for those of you who don't remember what a delta is, rivers that have deltas at the end of them don't just flow into the ocean nice and smoothly. That's the water. They have a tendency through flood and erosion to have different branches at the end, very much like you would see down in Louisiana. The Nile River has a big one that starts about 100 miles away from shore. And all of these little forks make irrigation in there really easy. It also makes it very fertile to grow crops in and around that area. So the Nile River Delta is a very fertile area. In India, we have the Indus River Valley civilization centered on the Indus River Valley in southern Asia, the northwest part of India. And then China is going to be in the Huanghe Valley in East Asia. That river has another name, which you guys might know it a little better by, and that is the Yellow River. So, Huanghe, Yellow River, they're the same thing here in northern China. Now, other civilizations that you need to be aware of: the Hebrews, the Phoenicians, and the Nubians. We will barely talk about the Nubians outside of this presentation. We will spend some serious time talking about the Hebrews, and the Phoenicians have one or two significant contributions that we'll tip our hats to. But you need to know about them as well and where they are located. The Hebrews are located on the Mediterranean Sea near the Jordan River Valley. It's part of the Fertile Crescent. It goes by another name these days that you might know it a little bit better as Israel, or sometimes it'll be called Palestine. So when we talked about Jericho, that's the same place. Jericho is located in Palestine. It's in the valley of Jordan River, Mediterranean, and the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. Alright, and then the Phoenicians are going to settle a little bit above the Hebrews. So our Hebrews are down here. Hebrews are down here. The Phoenicians are above them on the Mediterranean Sea. And that's the big thing, is you guys need to remember that they're on the Mediterranean coast. They're an ocean-going people. They like to sail. And the Nubians are actually located in the Upper Nile. Now, let's remember that the Nile is backwards. It is named backwards. So we have, I'll type this, upper is in the south. Go blue. And then lower is in the north. Now, the reason that is, guys, is you have to remember, everything is relative, and as far as the Egyptians were concerned, they didn't know north from south, from east from west. The sun set on one side and it sank on the other, and then the way they knew upper and lower is Nubia is up in the mountains. That's at the beginning of the Nile, and the Nile flows down into the Mediterranean, which was lower. Now, granted, that is south to north for us. So the upper, the higher elevation, the beginning of the Nile River, is where Nubia was. The lower Nile River is where we would think of as Egypt. Alright, river valley civilizations are going to lead to some development. Remember, we said civilizations separate themselves from just collections of people. We have the development of social patterns, political patterns, economic and religious traditions, social things like class system, political would be governments, law codes, economics, trade, slavery. Religious traditions are very obvious, polytheism, monotheism. And then one idea I want you guys to know is the cradle of civilization. This part of the world is known as the cradle of civilization. It's because it's the birthplace of civilization. I'll get it there. It's the birthplace of civilization. It's where civilization lived in its infancy. If you guys don't know what a cradle is, that's where you put babies when they're crying. Alright, social patterns. A couple key social patterns is we generally had a hereditary ruler. We would have dynasties of kings. In some places they were known as pharaohs. Alright, and these kings would inherit their rule from their parents. So my grandfather would be the king, his son, my father, would be the next king, and then I would succeed my dad. My eldest son would be next, his eldest son, and so on and so forth on down the line. Alright, oftentimes these kings were also part of their religious tradition, because a lot of times, as the pharaohs were, they were believed to be either God's representatives on earth or gods on earth. We also developed a rigid social class system, and when I say a rigid social class system, I'm not referencing a really hard, complicated bell schedule that you have to follow. I'm talking you would have at the top your gods, a king. Usually your priests were next. Then if you keep on working down, and I'll put hyphens, If you keep on working down the list from priests, you might have soldiers, then you might have some merchants, then you might have some laborers, and then 7 layers down we have slaves. Alright, social class system. Guys, slavery is accepted and practiced throughout history and throughout most of these areas. The one thing you have to understand and you have to be aware of is that slavery is not based on race. Political patterns, we have our world's first states. When we say states, we're talking countries, basically, guys. City-states are very small ones. They're literally cities that operate as their own individual countries. You got to think about Greece. Think Athens, Sparta. We'll talk more about it then. But in modern-day times, you have Luxembourg, or the Vatican in Rome is considered a city-state. It's its own country. Kingdoms are a little bit larger, usually a couple cities, a region, and then empires are when you have multiple different peoples, multiple different countries, and have been conquered. We have centralized governments that's usually based on religious authority, and what that means is the power is controlled within that government. So instead of having a spread out power base, we usually have a very strong ruler or a strong couple of people who have almost all authority. And as we said, it's religious authority. Usually the king is considered to be either God's representative on earth or a god on earth. We're also going to have our first written law codes. We have the 10 Commandments, which maybe you've heard of once or twice. And then we have my personal favorite, Hammurabi's Code, which we're going to talk about when we look at Mesopotamia. Whether that's next class or on the next video for you guys, it's up to you. And Hammurabi's Code is where we get the idea of an eye for an eye. Economic patterns that develop. We have the use of metal tools and weapons. So we have moved past stone tools. We have moved into the Bronze Age and eventually into the Iron Age. Now, bronze and iron damage less, so they become more efficient. We have to spend less time repairing them than we would with stone tools. So we can start increasing more. With an increase in agricultural surplus, that was a result of our better tools, the invention of the plow, irrigation, the better tools being because of the metals. Agricultural surplus is going to lead to the development of trade. If we've had a really good haul of corn and the next civilization over has had a really good haul of apples, maybe we're going to swap some of our extra corn for some of your extra apples and everyone is happy. We have the creation of our first cities. We'll talk about them as we go forward here. And then again, the practice of slavery within most cultures. Usually slavery consisted of conquered peoples, again, not by race, or as we'll look at when we look at Hammurabi's Code, sometimes that was how you paid a penalty. Instead of rotting in jail, they would force you into slavery for a period of time. And the last thing that I keep forgetting to make a slide for, guys, sorry, we have a couple of religious things that start to develop, and I want you to look at a couple of roots here. The word theism, what that means is religion, basically. So when we're talking about theisms, atheism doesn't believe in a god. Theism means religion. The word poly means many. The word mono means one. So when we talk about polytheism, that means believe in many gods. Monotheism, one God. Best example are the Hebrews. And eventually we'll talk about other religions. But those are the big things you need to know, polytheism versus monotheism. And that's going to be a wrap, folks.